Hey everyone, I'm Randall alongside Bob and Joseph. Welcome to Formidable Opponents, episode 8, a show that pits three people who have known each other virtually their entire lives in a series of conversations as we argue what is best in a variety of fun, engaging, and critical topics we all debate about. So episode 8, we're talking about best 90s rock song. A lot to unpack, a lot to uncover today. Bob and Joseph, how are you guys doing?
Doing very good. It was a nice day.
Yeah, doing great. I've been waiting a long time to talk about this topic.
Yeah.
So normally for you listeners out there, we release an episode every Monday. Yesterday was Easter, so we were pretty busy, didn't get an opportunity to meet up. But today is the actual 27th year anniversary of the death of Kurt Cobain. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So how fortuitous we're talking about it during an anniversary, maybe not the best anniversary, but we're talking about it today, something that's very significant. And of course, we'll get to him later. But today we wanted to talk a little bit about what makes a good 90s rock song. So just to give you guys a little history, and Bob, Joseph, whenever you guys want to jump on in and talk a little bit about this, please feel free. To me, the 90s was rock taking a leap back into the mainstream. When growing up, and I think you guys remember, rock was shunned to MTV shows like Headbangers Ball, 120 Minutes. You get maybe 2 to 4 hours a week of rock music on MTV. 90s rock, when it started off, it was pre-internet and the infancy of the internet. So we started really developing a following, mass-produced hits. We got a lot of people listening around the world. It was the last true decade where culture was centralized and hits mattered across the board. It was the zeitgeist of that rock era. That was felt, and mainstream stars were made and celebrated. Stars were made through rock. It was a carnival and it was integrated. MTV was now focusing on rock. Rock radio stations were emerging again. Now, today, guys, I listen to Alt Nation and there's some really good songs out there, but they aren't as big, or the artists aren't as big or relevant when they hit the pop stations 3 or 4 months later, but they are vetted and carefully picked. I don't think rock is the same anymore. I think you listen to rock on Alt Nation and it'll go to pop music. It'll go to a pop station and it's not really as relevant. I think rock as a connector is no longer an erudite figure. We no longer forecast or foresee popular crossover takeovers, and even popular musicians are sounding more and more alternative. It's kind of mixing in a little bit. It's bleeding and blending. With their production teams and money, long gone are the long shots who can take an inexpensive attempt and turn it into a mega sensation. Independent labels mattered. They don't matter anymore. And in the 90s, for rock at least, it was the Wild West, as the musical landscape was steep in rock sound and diverse in category. It was like a big ice cream parlor, and the wooden spoon samples were all delicious. Now, you can have loud, you can have quiet, you can have smart, angry. Now, guys, let me know if I miss anything here. We started the 90s era with hair metal and new wave. We had the emergence of alternative rock. Then heavy metal was there, indie rock, ska, pop rock, electronic, industrial rock, new metal, punk, pop punk, rap rock, and whatever the fuck Marilyn Manson was supposed to be. So what were your thoughts about the 90s, growing up in the 90s and listening to this type of music?
Well, I loved how you talked about the evolution of rock, especially in the 90s. You know, I think it goes back to the 70s. The 70s taught us that rock and roll can be expressed in a bunch of different ways. You know, you had metal and Sabbath, you had psychedelic and Pink Floyd, you had punk like the Ramones, and then you had that beautiful mix of blues and hard rock like Zeppelin. And then we moved to the 80s, and of course we had the glitz and glamour of the hair bands, that upbeat poppy commercial type of music with a shitload of perms and cocaine and shit, right? That's what the 80s was all about.
Spandex.
And then spandex, of course. And then the 90s came along, and I felt like it changed. I felt like everything changed again. It evolved again. 90s made rock relevant again. Not saying the 80s rock music wasn't relevant. You know, 80s rock music was great for what it was. But again, we saw those genres like in the 90s. Like you said, we saw those alternative, the punk rock, the hard rock, the metal, everything started to evolve. And it was all carved out of this like angst and anger and distortion. And, the evolution of rock and roll, man. I mean, it was all badass, and it was a huge change because it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows like the 80s. It was all relatable and cultural, like you said. It was a little bit fucking depressing. It was a little bit angry. It was all relatable as hell. It was the birth of grunge, which I think is the sound of 90s rock and roll.
Yeah, I agree with you. There was definitely a new age, a new uprising. I think people at some point were just sick and tired of the 80s glam, stuff. Shit got, old after a while. People were tired of it. There was a group of kids out there that were it wasn't for them. You know, the 80s glam thing it wasn't their scene. And like Bob said, we saw the uprising of grunge. There's this group of this community of kids and adults who just didn't feel that way, and or were pissed off or angry, like you mentioned, and they had something to say themselves, and that's what sparked, I guess, the revival of rock in the 90s, and which brought us more great genres of the 90s, like you mentioned, plenty of them. I think one of the biggest things that I remember about the change of 90s rock was I can't remember his name. Maybe you remember, Randy. There was when they first came out with Headbangers Ball, the original host was this guy. I can't remember his name.
I know it wasn't Ricky Rackman. It was
no.
Adam. Adam something.
Yeah, and he
Adam Curry.
Adam Curry. He was the worst possible host for a show like Headbangers Ball. He was from that, that 80s MTV VJ scene. It was just different, and he's even openly admitted to it, that it was just a horrible choice for him to do, or thing to do. He didn't represent what was coming. And yes, Ricky Rackman came out and hoped, they finally got the right formula going with that, which led to great shows with like Matt Pinfield. I loved 120 Minutes. That was great show.
Was awesome.
And so there really was like I blame it, like I said, I blame it on the just people getting sick and tired of the 80s glam stuff, which led to this actual great time in 90s rock music and really 90s music in general. I mean, we're kind of biased. We all know that's our great generation.
One thing I think that we left out was this new era of lead singers and frontmen for these 90s rock bands that all made them stand out and reach this like pinnacle of greatness. You had Cobain, you had Weiland, you had Layne, you had Cornell, you even had James Hetfield, Billy Corgan. The list can go on and on and on. There's so many great lead singers and frontmen that push these just grunge or hard rock bands into like this next tier, this next level of amazing sound.
And Bob, the another good point about those frontmen is that they were multifaceted. They were songwriters. They were guys who could play a multitude of instruments. They were men and women who brought new instruments into the fold. They were multifaceted and oftentimes depressed, but they were just very talented.
Another one too, Perry Farrell and the whole Jane's Addiction thing. That was it was just a whole. I mean, you can't call it. Nobody would say Jane's Addiction is just grunge, but you could say
alternative, maybe
alternative. It just speaks to the different, different types of genres of rock music that were out there in the 90s. Great time.
It was a great time. It was a great time to be a music fan too. Great time to go to concerts. Before we get to our selection, as a reminder, we're arguing what is the best 90s rock song. We're going to step into our honorable mentions. And just to give everybody a note, we know sometimes we gloss over some honorable mentions, talking to the people who told us we forgot to mention Chuck Norris last week when we did Biggest Action Hero. We do forget sometimes, but it's you guys email us, remind us, call us, let us know. So we're going to talk some honorable mentions. And as I mentioned last week, we covered Biggest Action Hero. And of course, with Stallone, we mentioned Creed a lot. We're not going to fucking mention Creed for any of the categories today.
Can I take you higher?
Give me some of your honorable mentions, Bob. Tell us some of the songs that didn't quite make the cut.
Well, I feel like Green Day's Dookie album, Green Day's Basket Case, I mean, was that bringing that punk rock back into the 90s. Great single, great album, actually. Stone Temple Pilots, Interstate Love Song, The Chili Peppers, Under the Bridge, Bush, Glycerin, Soundgarden's Black Hole Sun. One in particular that had a really big struggle with that I thought about choosing. Later, of course, I didn't end up going with the song, was Metallica's Enter Sandman.
We're going to talk about that. Yeah.
We're speaking of headbangers. I mean, I think that's the headbangers anthem of the 90s. That song was everything that you're looking for in a hard rock song. You can bang your head to it. You can cruise to it. You turn up the volume to it. It was just one of those great songs. And we're talking about Metallica here, who's put out song and album through the years that have all been huge hits and all been great. But I think Enter Sandman in the 90s, it was just the epitome of what a hard rock song should be.
I'm glad you mentioned Enter Sandman, Bubba, because I was going to talk about that in terms of band of interest, song of interest. But since you mentioned it already, let's go ahead and talk about it a little more. And Joseph, you're sort of our resident heavy metal enthusiast. By the way, how many times have you been asked by cholos in high school detention, hey, are you a rocker? No, anyway, but Enter Sandman, give me your thoughts about that particular song, Metallica in that era, and what you felt when you heard that song or when you hear that song.
To be honest with you, I mean, I'm not saying that I don't love the song. It definitely represented a change in the sound for Metallica. I mean, clearly it wasn't a bad change. It wasn't it was very different. You could hear the production value, I guess, if you want to say. Bob Rock brought this different style and feeling towards the actual recording, because if you listen back to just pretty much anything before the Black Album, they really stuck to their thrash roots. A lot of people might say, you know, even the hardcore fans, some that still love Metallica, but they might still say that this was a change to a more radio friendly Metallica, a more commercialized Metallica. And I can see that argument, but I don't necessarily agree with it, because there are the thrash roots are still very prominent on that album with Holier Than Thou. There's another great song off of that album. Of Wolf and Man is a great song. But as far as my feelings on it, still great song. Obviously, you know, if you were in any kind of situation where, you know, more so, I guess, sports, and that song came on, or if you're lifting weights or something, or if you're just getting ready to go, like, you know, give a speech, you put that shit on and you walk around the back and just bob your head up and down, maybe get yourself ready to go. And so that was a great song. And I can't argue that's not a great, you know, 90s song, or that it affected really the style of Metallica. So
Metallica had dominated the metal charts for a decade now. They're selling gold record after gold record. They're selling out arenas, maybe closer to 6,000 to 10,000. Now they released a Black Album and they say to themselves, now it's time to make our money. We're not teenagers anymore. We're heading into our 30s. The Beatles matured, Pink Floyd matured, all these other bands that are legendary. They had their concept albums and they had their growth. So I think Metallica thought, hey, like you mentioned, Joseph, people put our songs in at the gym, business people at the office, or cooks at the kitchen, people in their cars. Why can't we make something that is still metal, but it's pop metal, and we can make a buttload of money, get a lot more of our audience integrated to the songs that they like from our former albums, and just spread our wings and fly? Essentially, I think that's what they were thinking.
Yeah, well, I also think that they like you said, I think they evolved. Thrash metal kind of changed, and if you wanted to stay doing that, you know, you would always have that cult following, but you would not be known as, you know, one of the best rock bands that's ever played, has ever lived. And I think they just evolved into that new hard rock, alternative rock change in the 90s. They evolved into the 90s style of music instead of what they were doing before.
Are you guys both okay with that evolution? I know some of their follow-up albums weren't as great.
I'm very much okay with it. I mean, I'm a huge fan regardless. I know after that came Load and Reload, and what is considered the bluesy metal Metallica, I guess, which I dug. You know, I really dug it. It's really cool. I mean, and they did it. They took a chance. It worked for me. I know. I mean, did they really care whether you liked it or not? No. And that's what's cool to me. I mean, I thought they were great albums regardless. And they've gone more towards their thrash roots as of now. So, I mean, it's cool. They did what they did. I mean, they're the biggest metal band in the world, and I think they're still kicking. I mean, I've seen them live once, thankfully. One of the greatest shows I've ever seen in my life. It was just a real privilege to see them. So
now, Bob, you mentioned your honorable mentions. Joseph, why don't we talk about your honorable mentions for best 90s rock song?
Like Paranoid Android from Radiohead.
Good one.
That's that's another genre in itself. The punk rock of the 90s, When I Come Around by Green Day. Alanis Morissette, You Ought to Know. Great song. I actually like Ironic more, but I know she's more famous for that one. Did you mention Alice in Chains, dude? I'm sure you mentioned Alice in Chains. Maybe Man in the Box.
Started that song kind of kicked everything off. I
know it's not necessarily hard rock, but I mean Wonderwall by Oasis was I mean this huge hit. You know, great song too. You know, the hippie guy, the hippie rock from the 90s, the Blind Melon with No Rain.
We had to bring, I was going to say, we had to bring the Beatles into 90s grunge era. That was Oasis.
Yeah. Oasis was great. And any other selections, Joseph?
Pretty much, I can't not mention, I don't think I did, Nirvana, Come As You Are, Heart Shaped Box, always one of my favorite songs. Heart Shaped Box, I can hear that song anytime it comes on. Really love it.
I think for some of my honorable mentions, I think you guys mentioned a whole bunch of them. I had, and of course, we could probably sit down and list 40 or 50 songs.
True.
yeah.
It would be really hard to make
so
this list.
It's really tough. I had Creep by Radiohead. I had Wonderwall Oasis. Alive by Pearl Jam. I put I Alone by Live. I don't think it was their best song. I like All Over You, but for commercial reasons, I think I Alone just was their signature song. Mr. Jones by the Counting Crows. I think very underrated. A lot of people don't consider that rock, although it is, it is what it is. It's fun. It's poppy, but it's a great song, I think. Sabotage by the Beastie Boys, Buddy Holly by Weezer. Bob, you mentioned Under the Bridge. I like Linger a lot by the Cranberries, and Big Empty by Stone Temple Pilots. Now, Bob, you and I were texting back and forth about this. STP had the misfortune of coming out of the gates and sounding like Pearl Jam, some people thought. And everyone accused them of bolstering their portfolio through grunge association. And that wasn't fair to them. What are your thoughts on that? Did you do any reading or background on the Pearl Jam STP comparisons?
Well, I mean, I honestly think it's laughable how people can think that Pearl Jam and STP or STP was a knockoff or a sound alike. First off, I just want to say this. Speaking of Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, people who can't speak worth the shit. Eddie Vedder, you can't understand what the fuck he's saying.
Don't make fun of him. I love Eddie Vedder.
Hey, you can love him all you want, but I mean, he doesn't even articulate when he speaks. When he sings, Scott Weiland is completely different from Eddie Vedder in sound, in type of music. I mean, he fits more of the, you said grunge, but I mean, I've always thought SDP was more like alternative. They have some more of the pop rock. They have a lot of different flavors. They even have some blues and Tripping on a Hole with a Paper Heart. I just don't see the correlation or the connection, how people can say that Eddie Vedder and Scott Weiland, because really that's who they're comparing, not the band sound, because everybody sounded like grunge at that time. Comparing those two head to head, I don't think that there's any correlation there. What do you think, Joseph?
I disagree with that very much so. I to say the people out there, and I'm not saying you didn't say that, Randy, but the people that are out there that do say the type of shit like that, they're two different bands, and to I mean, if you want to just go on vocals alone, Bob's right. You have Vedder going, you don't know what the fuck he's saying.
Just had a stroke. But speaking of that, put that on pause, Joseph, because what I'm thinking with a lot of people, because you just brought up a good point, even flow, he stresses the ease in the middle of the song. I think on Plush, Scott Weiland stresses the ease in the middle of words. So, when he says, I'm feeling, so it sounds like even flow, feel. I think that's where a lot of people drew the comparison. I know David Spade made a joke
about
it.
He stole it from the Monkees because the Monkees have too many fucking E's in their name.
If they want to base it on that one song alone, that's crazy. Everybody, if you know Stone Temple Pilots, or at least old Stone Temple Pilots, not new Stone Temple Pilots, with whoever it is their new singer, classic Stone Temple Pilots and Scott Weiland himself, he was heavily influenced by David Bowie. He was not, he was so heavily much influenced. If you want to not in we've had this discussion before. We called it a cross between
Robert
Plant. There you go. Thank you. And David Bowie in performance wise, in character. You look at the way Scott Weiland would perform and move on stage, the get up, the costumes. I mean, if you want to say he didn't obviously sound like David Bowie, but if you want to say that he wanted to be somebody or to emulate anybody, it's David Bowie. And to say that like they were ripping off Pearl Jam, I mean it's completely different music styles though. I mean, it really is.
It was a thing back in the 90s. David Spade made a joke on SNL, and a lot of people were saying that, Pearl Jam coming out first, Even Flow coming out in 92, Plush coming out in 93, that they were, but I agree with you guys. This is not an argument about who's the better lead singer or who's a knockoff or whatever. I'm just saying that was a thing and that was prevalent. I think Stone Temple Pilots carved their way out of it. I think the only thing about Stone Temple Pilots is that they had their demons, particularly Scott Weiland, and I think they're one of those bands when you look into the rock history, they shortchanged themselves because they could have been a lot bigger than what they were, and that's just my opinion.
I mean, you could say that about a lot of the bands in the 90s. I mean, Layne Staley in Alice in Chains, True. Chris Cornell, Kurt Cobain, a lot of these guys had fucked up problems and drug addictions, and I think a lot of their careers fell short because of the drug addictions and the demons that they were battling.
What does that say about us? Do we have issues? These guys are heroes.
No kidding. Well, it was heavily I mean, you got to say that despite all that, there was a genius to all these people. And speaking of geniuses, I know we each chose bands and songs that we think are genius. So Joseph, we're going to start off with you and your selection. Talk a little bit about what you think is the best rock song of the 90s.
All right, so I'd like to say first that after spending a week listening to the different forms of 90s rock playlists, like all the different genres that you mentioned earlier that we've talked about, whether it was hard rock, grunge, alternative rock, you name it. It was a real hard pick to make. I hope that it was for you guys as well, because then I don't know what I'm talking about, but it was real hard to pick my favorite, what I thought was the best 90s rock song. Although this isn't my favorite 90s rock song, I mean, to even try that would be crazy. I chose it more for its meaning and how it makes me feel and how I think it makes others feel. And so with that being said, I chose Scatman by Scatman John. And
that's like that guy influenced Eddie Vedder, by the way.
No, my choice was is Tonight by the Smashing Pumpkins. Tonight is one of the most lasting and memorable Smashing Pumpkins songs. It can also be described as one of their most mysterious songs, depending on how you take your take of it. To me, the song has always alluded to change and uncertainty, but ending on a very hopeful note. And that always really meant something to me. The impossible is possible tonight. That line, I mean, it's incredible. Billy Corgan has always been a bit short when it comes to explaining what his songs are about. But he once explained that this song was about himself and how he was able to get out of his hometown of Chicago and pursue his dreams. So he's kind of gave that tidbit. So, and that's why I chose this song. I know there are plenty of songs out there that can lift you up, especially from the 90s, bring you out of the dark. But this one, I always felt means the most. I'm not going to get into the music video other than tell you that visually, I think it's a masterpiece and the best story that could be told based on the song. It did win 6 Video Music Awards. That's right. MTV used to play music videos. Yes. The biggest of those awards being Music Video of the Year. For some reason you've never seen it, I suggest you do. When I hear this song, I think about youth and uncertainty of what the next step of your life was or is going to be. For me, it was being a junior high kid, getting ready for high school, not knowing how the next 4 years of my life were going to pan out, and what type of impact that was going to have on my future. I always felt was coming sooner than later. You get into high school and it's just, what's next? And depending on where we were in our lives at the time, it was either coming at you real quicker, you had to grow up faster. I think we had to do that a lot at our age. But the same can be said, for outgoing seniors. What's next for them when they were venturing out into the world after high school? When they're going to go to college or they're going straight into the work world? That song to me gave these individuals or people like me, something to think about when I heard it. When I was checking out some of the YouTube comments, I watched this video like 6 times a day for the last week to get myself really ready and get into the feeling. When I was watching the video, I read some of the YouTube comments, and somebody ended up putting, the song takes me back to being a geeky 16-year-old kid in the 90s, spending long summers with guitars around fires and good friends, beers in our hands and life stretching out forever in front of us. Billy made those nights immortal. Now, if this guy's saying that he was a geeky 16-year-old, and more than likely he wasn't sitting in front of a campfire playing guitar or drinking beers. But
in front of a Nintendo.
In front of a Nintendo. But it's the message that it's the message of the song. And what he said, whether it be true or not, I think resonates with what I was trying to say as a youth. Time is never time at all. You can never, ever leave without leaving a piece of youth. That line, I mean, it means so much as a kid trying to figure out what you're going to, do, what you want to be. Most of all, I find this song can be the words you need. Most of all, I find that this song can be the words that you need to hear to take a chance on that thing in your life that you're most fearful of, whether it be love, going back to school, finishing school, anything you want to do that you're afraid to do, afraid to take that leap. This is your song. The line, and you're never sure, but you're sure you could be right if you held yourself up to the light. That's what this is about. It's about taking that chance. It's about not being afraid to move on, to go on, to stand up, or to put it all on the line out there, you know, whatever that may be. It's I know there's still a possibility that doing this, putting yourself out there after you've heard this song, getting yourself emotionally ready, you know, I know that there's that possibility that it can still go wrong, but it's the last line that I'll finish my argument up with. The impossible is possible tonight. Believe in me as I believe in you. And that's why I chose this song. The enduring message, the meaning. And it doesn't have to be nighttime for you to take this chance, but, you know, it could help. I know the song's tonight, but, you know, this song, if you listen to it, you can take that chance anytime. To me, that's why I chose this song. This song means that to me.
And I think that's awesome. And what's crazy is out of the 3 selections that we chose today, this is actually my favorite song. My favorite song out of all 3 selections. The other 2 we'll be speaking of later. I mean, the chorus, the drum beat, the orchestra, the music video. I mean, the song really did have it all. The lyrics, like you said, you know, the one that always gets me, of course, is the time is never time at all. You can never ever leave without leaving a piece of youth. Like I said, it's kind of like that coming of age, that growing up type of song. I actually remember it. Speaking of 96, I remember when MTV did show music videos, and on New Year's Eve every year they had the best 100 videos of the year. Mm-hmm. And I remember watching the countdown, and I always played this guessing game with my sister and whoever was there with us at the time. And it came out to the last 2, which ironically was Alanis Morissette, number 2, and Tonight by Smashing Pumpkins winning number 1 video of the year, which I thought was kind of cool. It brought up a great memory watching that video. Like you said, watching that video over and over this week. Having said that, there's not a lot I can argue against Tonight Smashing Pumpkins, other than one particular thing. It sucked. No, I'm just kidding. I don't feel like it was the best representation of 90s rock. Granted, 90s rock delivered us plenty of different genres and types of rock and roll, but I just don't feel like it hit with that grunge, with that distortion, with what I feel is 90s rock. I honestly think that Bullet with Butterfly Wings is a better representation of 90s rock and roll. You know, and if we're going off of favorite song or better song, you know, I think 100% I'd be with you talking about Tonight. But I feel like Billy Corgan's his voice, his grit, the guitar riff, the distortion in Bullet with Butterfly Wings just speaks to 90s rock and roll. That's I think what separates it, and what separates the 2. I feel like Tonight may be timeless. You know, one of those great songs that in any era, I think could be, any decade could be one of those great songs, and will be one of those great songs. But I feel like Bullet with Butterfly Wings was the 90s, was more grunge, was more distortion. What do you think, Ren?
I love the Smashing Pumpkins. A joyful song from a joyless band. I love their. I'm a deep cuts fan when it comes to Smashing Pumpkins. I was trying to look for a song. I think Pavement sang a song called "Fuck Billy Corgan." I couldn't find it, but I think it's out there. But check it out if you have a chance.
Sounds like something Courtney wrote.
I think she literally did. Brilliant lead singer, and he knew he was brilliant. Talking about Corgan, he knew he was brilliant. I think that was his problem. They took themselves way too seriously at times, and this was the apex of that. It took away from the rage, from the whine. You know, I mean, he whined a lot, but it was a good whine. It was the whine we felt as teenagers and as people in high school, and the misanthropy. I like their deep cuts. I'm going to list some of my favorite Smashing Pumpkin songs: Mayonnaise, Rocket, Space Boy, Hummer, Drown. And I love some of their mainstream hits. Cherub Rock, 1979, who we all love. Today, Bullet with Butterfly Wings. Progressive rock with brilliant concepts, sort of like he's the narcissistic know-it-all, and no other Smashing Pumpkins song showcases it like Tonight for Billy Corgan. The song for me, I mean, it's out of bounds for me as a Smashing Pumpkins fan. I do like the song, but it doesn't feel rock. It feels showy. It's orchestra. It's too self-aware. It's too showy. It's like the oatmeal raisin on the cookie tray that is the Smashing Pumpkins discography.
I thought you were going to say Phil Collins.
You know, Smashing Pumpkins had the misfortune of coming off the heels of Nirvana. So for any bands who were as brilliant as Nirvana, which I think Billy Corgan's as brilliant a musician as Kurt Cobain is or was, he just had that misfortune. To Die Tonight, it was whimsical, it was boisterous, it was cute. They wanted the stage too much, and rock songs are supposed to be deeply personal, but this song is too enormous for me. It's inviting. There's no capture to it. It's too inclusive. I don't want dad tapping on the steering wheel to the drum part. I don't want to collectively sing the hook at a crowded bar. I don't want this song playing at a restaurant when I'm thinking about how spicy I want my pad thai because it's a family restaurant music cut. I want something deeper when it comes to my rock music. Siamese Dream is an incredible album, cover to cover, great songs in Melancholy, but Melancholy in the Infinite Sadness, it's more of a we made it. I'm sorry, more than Billy Corgan made it, I should say. It doesn't have the riffs. It doesn't have the charm or work that Siamese Dream has. It's anthemic, the song is, but it's also a predecessor for a band like Arcade Fire and ushering an outlook rather than being wrapped in the 90s lore. I was listening to an interview with Bill Simmons, and he had mentioned that if it was Corgan who died instead of Cobain, he'd be hailed as a legend because that would have kept us from 27 more years of his shitty attitude. But I think Corgan's, I think Corgan, combine their names. I think Corgan is brilliant. I think the song is awesome. I don't consider it one of the best 90s songs. I think even if I put a top 20, I know it was a hit. I know the video was tremendous and they took strides to making it that way. But I just don't think of Tonight as rock, especially when you put it up against some of their just distorted guitar, the melodic whine, the drum, and the noise that the Smashing Pumpkins are known for.
I think that, okay, I understand. I see your all's points. I just, if it's all going to depend on what you consider rock. We just talked about a bunch of other different songs in our honorable mention, and would you say that Wonderwall was a rock song? Is it any different, or is it because it was just an acoustic guitar with the strings are there?
It's a rock song.
You hear the cello,
but it's not the greatest rock song.
I'm not saying that it's the greatest. I'm just saying it's not very rock key or rock like the way you described what you want to hear. But you mentioned it,
yeah. But I think go ahead.
Well, no, I mean, so I if you search any 90s rock playlist, whether it be on YouTube, Amazon, Apple Music, Spotify, this song is more than likely going to come out. And I agree with you. I understand what y'all are saying. The reason I hope that I made it explained why I chose. I felt that at the time, the 90s the digital age was coming in 2000s. We had all this, I know it was released in 96. It was, well before 2000, but the uncertainty of what was coming in the new millennium, it was just it was a song to have hope and to look forward to, so that's why I chose it. I mean, that's my thing.
I would think to add on to that, Joe, so not to side with you in any ways, but we talked about the 90s being an evolution of rock and roll, and then the genres on genres on genres, and it could be described in so many different ways. Like you said, Wonderwall, Interstate Love Song, they're not distorted, they're not, they're different. And you said, Tonight may have been, the basis for Arcade Fire. But yeah, because I think that it was all a part of the evolution and the transition of rock and roll. Rock and roll in the 90s could be hard, could be distorted, could be soft, could be acoustic, could be a lot of different things. My only argument against it is when I think of 90s rock, yes, there was a bunch of different genres. The one in particular that stands out is grunge and alternative.
I think your Oasis argument, I think Oasis was pretty faithful. They knew what their lane was. I think with Smashing Pumpkins, and it's sort of harkening back to the Metallica argument. Like, well, you grow, you mature, you sound different, you experiment with different instruments, and you do all this new stuff. It's not that Tonight's a bad song. It's just I think it's a misrepresentation. If I brought in somebody from another planet who's never heard a Smashing Pumpkins song, and I want to say this song rocks, I'm going to play you something from the Smashing Pumpkins, it's not going to be Tonight. It's popular, I get it, and it is a rock song, but it's not, to me, I just don't feel it. When I listen to Tonight, I don't feel it as something that will say, oh yeah, that reminds me of a time and a place where I loved music. It just reminds me of a decent song from a band who had much better, deeper cuts and much better hits. I think that's just my opinion.
Okay, I hear you.
Cool. So silence. I'll edit this.
That's just my opinion into your song. Go and you can go into your
Well, here's my opinion. Let me tell you something.
So no, I hear you guys, and I guess that's why we got our listeners out there. They're gonna, everybody's got a different point, and that's what's great.
And to be like the final touch on it, it was a really hard line to travel, to choose to cross between best song and your favorite song. To be honest with you, it was really, really difficult to distinguish between the two when doing all this research, when listening to all this music. It was really difficult, whether you go with, man, this is my favorite, or, well, I think this was the best. They kind of intertwined a little bit, and I can see how, Joseph, it intertwined in your choice.
Yeah.
So, and overall, I think it's a great, great song. One of my favorites.
No, it's a tremendous song, and it did have its moments.
What did you pick, Randy?
Yes, let's move on to my selection. My selection, you cannot argue. I chose.
I will.
Oh, you will.
No, I'm sorry. Go for it.
I picked Everlong from the Foo Fighters. I'm going to tell you a little bit why. Everlong, just a great song. Emotionally packed, emotional content. It's raw and authentic. It just gives you this feeling. I wasn't going to go with this song because I felt like Foo Fighters coming into the tail end of the 90s, when they really hit it big, because when I think of 90s, I think of grunge and I think of everything we mentioned before: Nirvana, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, STP. But then when I started listening to the songs I wanted to narrow it down to for this selection, Everlong hit me the most. And it's a song I've probably listened to hundreds of times at bars with friends. I've seen live bands butcher it. But for some reason, this song just hit me and it stuck with me. I think it's timeless. And Bob, you mentioned Phil Collins earlier, and my selection for best heartbreak song was Against All Odds. I think the buildup for this song is similar. I think this song goes through phases. It starts off, Dave Grohl and the band get really into it as they start building it up. It's an intense emotional period. I think Dave Grohl was he was dating Louise Post from Veruca Salt. And it was a time in his life where he had no access to his bank account. He was sort of failing. I know his drummer, William Goldsmith, and his guitarist were on the verge of quitting the Foo Fighters. I know that when they set out that first album, he wasn't happy with the drumming, so he re-recorded it. The first album didn't do as well as he anticipated, and he was thinking, I was a drummer of Nirvana. That should carry. I mean, I don't know if he was thinking that, but I think he expected that levity to maybe carry over. But that first album, even though it's a good one, it didn't really amount to the success I think Grohl and company anticipated. And in the midst of all this, he wrote this song in about 45 minutes. It's been immortalized to a stripped down acoustic version. I don't know if you guys know the story of how the acoustic version came to be. I
know it was on Howard Stern.
Howard Stern, yeah. It was 6 a.m. and Howard Stern wanted him to do Everlong. And he was like, nobody wants to listen to loud guitar at 6 a.m. So I'm going to play it acoustically. And he did. Written in 1996, he was sitting in an isolation booth and Grohl started strumming a chord, which sounded like a Sonic Youth song. And he thought he was playing a Sonic Youth song. Lyrics matched and it represented what he felt at the time. And I mentioned the Howard Stern anecdote. It's criminally overlooked. I think as popular as this song is, I think people overlook it a lot when they think of 90s rock songs. I think everybody sort of just floats over to the grunge era. Everybody goes over to the Nirvanas and all these other bands, and they don't really think of Everlong being the pinnacle of 90s rock music. And it came right in the middle of the decade as well. So it kind of was like the hammock or the bridge, I should say, to what post grunge was and what new rock was going to be. It communicates to your soul. The only thing that's more wondrous than man's ability to create music is the ability to feel it. And I think this song was felt. I think the song poured out of him. It just hit him. And, Dave Grohl's not a guy who could read music. He just started playing it and it just came to life. I know this is arguing what's better, but it's also about inspiration. And I think if the song has a good inspiration, it's going to touch people in a way that inspires them. And when you listen to a song that just rocks, great lyrics, the lead singer with such conviction and a great story, people are going to love it. And Grohl, he wasn't bequeathed Nirvana's fan base. He had to build it up himself. This song evolved and mutated what 90s rock should be. He was a cultural conduit. And I think David Grohl is one of the best musicians to come out of the 90s. He's the best musician, one of the best musicians living now. And you can extrapolate a lot from a person by the way they tell you how this song makes them feel. So if you talk to somebody, to ask them what they feel about Everlong, you're going to get somebody 9 out of 10 times who tells you they love the song, they have a great story behind it, or it's a great song to chill to, it's a great song to listen to with friends. It's just it checks all the boxes, guys. And just summing it up, I think I chose this song because it's just amazing. I cannot get tired of this song. It reminds me of so many things. It reminds me of so many people. It reminds me of so many great times. And I just don't know how you could argue how this song isn't the pinnacle of 90s rock. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, when you think of the Foo Fighters and their beginning, it's the exact opposite of what he was in Nirvana. It was like grunge music at Starbucks. You know what I mean? The stupid Mentos or Fructose video and song that they had. There was definitely a change. Now, the Foo Fighters, when you talk about Howard Stern and you talk about Everlong, I think of instantly Varsity Blues. Varsity Blues was a movie that came out in the late 90s. It was a football. That was actually one of the main songs when, James Vanderbeek is there running down the football field.
I don't want your life.
Yeah, I don't want your life. That's actually a song that I listened to before football games to get me fired up before workouts. It does tap into some emotional thing, but I think it got me more fired up than anything, which is a surprise because, it wasn't a Metallica song. It wasn't a Master of Puppets. It wasn't this crazy, loud, distorted song, but it did move me in a certain way, motivated me in a certain way. Dave Grohl, like you mentioned, kicked ass for the past 2 decades. He's made great rock music. He's put out hit after hit after hit. And in particular, that acoustic version is one of my top songs of all time. Again, having said that, I do not feel that he hit his stride until his second, third, and fourth album. It was in the 2000s. I don't feel like his song Everlong made a big impact on 90s rock music. And that's what we're arguing right now is 90s rock song, best 90s rock song. And its impact, I just don't think it was felt. I think exactly what you said about Tonight is what I'm thinking of Everlong and the Foo Fighters. Same thing. They both had that great meaning. They had those great lyrics, so you feel something by it, but neither one of them defines 90s rock music. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I heard what you said, and I when I before we got started, I said that this would be that I felt that it was a tough decision for myself, and you guys said the same thing. So I've looked at your songs and I said to myself, they're great songs. I love them both. They could be on that list of my favorite songs of the 90s. But a lot of the things that you said about yours, Randy, I believe you said that it makes you feel motivated. Did I get that right?
Yeah, motivated, inspired.
Inspired is a lot of the same stuff that I basically just said about mine. Now, your song does have the fast drums, the guitar. Yeah, it does rock. I've heard the lyrics. I've heard the song so many times. You've seen the lyrics in your head, in your car by yourself when nobody's looking, hopefully. And so when I actually looked at them, I mean, the song, I'm not getting what you said as far as inspiration. I mean, it's kind of like a love story, to be honest with you, the way I look at it, but that's my interpretation. Like I said, everything's open to interpretation here. I don't hate your pick. Obviously I love the song. I just kind of feel like it's the same feeling that you have when you listen to it is the same way that I feel about mine. And really our arguments are kind of one and the same, maybe just because your song has, it rocks, yeah, sure. Does it make you want to run? Not really. I mean, I don't want to run to Everlong.
I think he runs in the video.
Yeah, I know. Wait, that video is confusing as hell. Good video though. But I think it's like to what Bob said earlier with Varsity Blues. I think it was a Hero that was featured more in Varsity Blues. Now that song, you want to get out there and run, and you want to go. You hear that thing, you want to go get ready and go, like, there goes my hero, So I love the pick. I'm not going to be too negative on yours other than just saying that I think a lot of the stuff you said about how it made you feel is what I said about mine. So just, I guess, different tones of music. I mean, yours has a little bit more drums and distortion guitars and mine didn't. Mine had more of the orchestra.
Fair enough. I just to wrap this one up before we hand it off to you, Bob. You mentioned Hero. Do you guys think there's a better Foo Fighter song than Everlong? You could go to the 90s, you could go to 2000s. Is there a better Foo Fighter song than Everlong? Just out of curiosity, sort of stepping aside.
February Stars and Walking After You are pretty fucking good. They're also very depressing. And I think Joseph hit on a really good note. I think Everlong's a love song or a love story. You know, I think a lot of the songs that came out on that, other than maybe Monkey Wrench off of that album, had a lot to do with love and heartbreak, that meant bringing up February Stars and, you know, Walking After.
I think after this song, he dated Winona Ryder, just like every other lead singer did in the 90s. So yeah, she'll make you write those songs, I guess.
Are you talking about Johnny Depp?
And Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum, he dated her as well.
I really liked Monkey Wrench. I mean, that was one of my favorite songs, and that's like that from that album. If you're talking about 90s, if we want to go, I mean, but it's going to be on what you determine is represents the best rock song. Monkey Wrench is a great rock song, and it's on that same album. So yeah, I mean, your question, is there a better song than Everlong? Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I really like Everlong, but I really like a lot of other Foo Fighters songs as well.
I just think, like, when you think of rock songs, the way I put myself in the mindset is like, if I'm at a crowded bar and this song comes out and people go ape shit and they could jump to it, they could emote to it. And that's what I defined Everlong is. Now, granted, Tonight is a very emotionally impactful song. I know we all have our personal stories to it, but that came on at a bar, I'd be like, oh yeah, cool, they're doing a Smashing Pumpkins cover. I don't think I would get lost in the moment, but that's just me. And we'll go ahead and move on because I know Bob has his pick waiting. And go ahead, Bob, what'd you pick?
Well, I loved you all's picks. Again, you all's, I actually like Tonight and Everlong more than my choice. Not saying I dislike my choice. I really love this song as well. But I think there's a fine line, like I said before, between your favorite 90s rock song and the best 90s rock song. And to me, I think there was no argument to make. It was a clear-cut winner from the beginning. It's Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit. That's right. A song that's ironically named after deodorant that was a ripoff of the Pixies is the best song of the 1990s. Smells Like Teen Spirit. It's the most influential rock song of the 90s. There's no argument against that. The song took grunge mainstream, and its popularity shined a bright light on the next big genre of rock music, which is grunge. It's a song that defines a decade of headbangers and distortion, which I feel is the 90s. That's 90s rock. The opening riff alone makes you want to bang your head and turn up the volume full blast. And I know you said you're talking about listening to the song at the bar, and if somebody plays it or it comes on, everybody's singing, everybody's banging their head, everybody knows the lyrics, as confusing and fucked as they may be. It's the greatest 90s rock song, in my personal opinion, that I think was ever made. It's instantly recognizable from the opening guitar riff to Dave Grohl's drum beat to Kurt Cobain's that angst-filled tone to even the confusing lyrics, like I just talked about. It all combines. You know, it leads to just the biggest fucking rock hit of the 90s, man, and quite possibly one of the best ever. The 90s were a decade filled with just great rock bands and exceptional lead singers, but I honestly think that Kurt Cobain was the best at all of them. You can argue left and right, but I mean, his voice and his sound stood above all. And that's why he's so remembered on this day, 27 years later, him passing away. His voice is that tone, that grit, that growl. That's 90s rock music. When you think of grunge, you think of Kurt Cobain and that sound. You think of Nirvana. You think of Smells Like Teen Spirit. Yeah, it's just, the song was just huge, and it continues to be huge. And when you think of grunge music, you think of Nirvana. When you think of 90s rock, you think of grunge, you think of Nirvana, and you think of Smells Like Teen Spirit. That was their coming out party. That the song became a huge success and won award after award in 92. And its popularity really made Nirvana the biggest rock band, one of the biggest rock bands in the world. And ironically, its success led to Cobain and Nirvana actually, resenting the song and refusing to play it at concert, which I thought was really grunge, right? It's really like fuck society and fuck everyone. They wanted to be this big, crazy rock band. And then everybody fell in love with that song, and they're like, fuck this. We don't want to play this anymore. Yeah. It's funny. I was watching videos and looking back at it. They would literally destroy amps and guitars to get out of playing it at the end of concert, which I feel is fucking awesome. One of those bands that became too big and try to humble its own self and say, okay, we get it. The song's great. We got a lot of other cool shit. But I mean, that song became bigger than itself, bigger than the band actually thought it probably could. They have, like I said, they've always been more than just that one hit wonder. And there's no way that anyone can argue against that. Smells Like Teen Spirit wasn't their biggest hit. And they helped define rock and roll in the 1990s. They're just one of my favorite bands of all time, and they put hit after hit after hit, like Joseph mentioned, Heart Shaped Box. I mean, Come As You Are, In Bloom. They put out so much great and influential, music over the short time in the 90s. And I think Nirvana's Smells Like Teen Spirit is just one of those songs that will live on forever as the sound of rock and roll.
So you can't doubt that this song was the biggest influence of grunge music and the introduction. I still remember the first day I heard this song. It was September. I was a freshman in high school, and coming back to my room, I put away all my my NWA cassettes and said, I'll see you guys later. I remember where I was. I was in geometry class when I heard across the classroom when some dude was telling this other guy, hey, did you hear what happened to Kurt Cobain? He died. He killed himself. So you remember all these things. I love Nirvana. Just a huge influence. First CD I ever bought was Nevermind. And it's tough to argue this song. And I'm going to go with a very specific reason why I'm arguing it. And it's not so much coming from me, but the lead singer himself, it's, anger is energy. And Kurt Cobain was a self-loathing, tortured genius. With this track, Nirvana, helped ignite the grunge craze, which was characterized by loud guitars, angst-ridden lyrics, and flannel. And you got to credit Butch Vig, who was a producer on Nevermind. He took all these songs and made them extra loud, just extra crazy, and he created a culture, or helped to create a culture. Cobain said he wrote this song because he was feeling disgusted with my generation's apathy and with my own apathy and spinelessness. So he was feeling like so many of us were feeling, but we had no funnel to express this. This was before, mental health was a very serious issue in school. This was before we had extra counselors at school. This was something that spoke to so many of us. It was just a breath of fresh air that this guy was singing what we were all feeling. This song often shows up on lists of the best songs of the 90s and the best songs of all time. I mean, Cobain, however, and this is where I'm going to go with my angle of it not being the best 90s rock song. Cobain, however, was often a contrarian. He actually had some negative feelings towards Smells Like Teen Spirit. The final cut didn't sound like Kurt Cobain wrote and what he envisioned. Cobain told Rolling Stone he was almost embarrassed to play Smells Like Teen Spirit, as you mentioned, Bob, because everyone has focused on that song so much. The reason it gets a big reaction is because people have seen it on MTV a million times. It's pounded into their brains. And Kurt Cobain mentioned, I think there are so many other songs that I've written that are as good, if not better than that song. Like Drain You, that's definitely as good as Smells Like Teen Spirit. I love the lyrics. I never get tired of playing it. Maybe if it was as big as Teen Spirit, I wouldn't have liked it so much. Of course, he's going to, contradict himself. He hated the production of Nevermind. He said it sounded more like a Motley Crue song than it did a Sonic Youth or the Melvins or the Pixies, because he thought it didn't sound punk rock, and those were his influences. You can't mention Nirvana without, I think, their best performance was MTV's Unplugged. I mean, every song they played there, I don't think they played Smell Like Teen Spirit, but every song they played there was just magical. I thought the true essence of what Nirvana was as a band was contained in those 2 hours of MTV's Unplugged. And Cobain actually felt that this song was cliched in some way. And Bob, you mentioned, when you first hear the riffs, you instantly recognize it. Well, it sounds a lot like More Than a Feeling by Boston as well when you hear the opening riffs. And a lot of people gave Cobain, I don't know if they gave him crap, but there was a lot of influence on Boston, a lot of influence on the Pixies. And my problem calling this the best song, I think it's the most influential, but calling this the best song of the 90s when the lead singer doesn't even see it as the best song in the album of his catalog, it just sort of puzzles me. I think it's a great song, but I will say this, and I know we're going to get to your points next, Joseph. Smells Like Teen Spirit, I think a song has to endure. And I tried listening to it a few times. It's kind of taken the sort of position that Hotel California and Freebird have taken with me. I think those songs are brilliant, but I can't listen to Hotel California anymore because it's too long. It's too drawn out. I can't listen to Freebird anymore. I can't listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit. If it comes out on the alternative radio stations or the 90s rock stations, I change it. It's not because I hate the song, but I just don't think the song endures. I think we're long past it. I think for a time, for the zeitgeist, it was phenomenal. But I think when you're looking back at the 90s, I don't think Smells Like Teen Spirit is an enduring song that everybody's going to flock to. I think there are other songs that are underrated that are going to come to prominence as the time goes on and on. It's a wonderful song, but I just can't hear it anymore. And that's my gripe. Joseph?
Go ahead, Joseph, and then I'll respond.
Okay. Well, you want to know an enduring song? It's Tonight. Now, I agree with what Randy said as far as it being most influential. Definitely. I mean, you think of 90s rock, where the grunge era was, I think at one point, I mean, a lot of people are going to probably think that 90s rock was just grunge, and I think we've made it clear it wasn't. There was grunge, there was a 90s heavy metal, 90s hard rock, 90s alternative rock. They were all great. Bob, this song, it is very influential. I think it definitely kicked the door down on the 90s and brought this this new like anger attitude. And in a way, some people can say, I mean, I think so. Nirvana opened the door for maybe, every other band that was just, on the cusp of doing something great. And when Nirvana made it, big with this song, this album in particular, it gave everybody the chance, like, hey, we do some heavy stuff too. We do some great stuff. We have an attitude. We have issues. We have something that we want to say. And so I definitely think that it opened the door. My only, I guess, if you want to call it an argument, because some people will say, well, that doesn't, just because that happened doesn't mean shit, or it's not, the band's fault. It came out, what was it, 1991? I think.
Yeah, 91. It hit number one in 92.
Came out in 90. The album was released in 91. Their second album, you're talking about 91, where they were at the beginning of the 90s. Their second album, In Utero, came out in 93. And I agree with him, with Kurt's opinion that it's not their best song. I love the song. It's not, personally, I think Heart Shaped Box is a great song. And you hear the difference in, his complaints about this album and this song. You hear that in the production of Nevermind and what came out in Utero. I think, and in no fault to the band itself, and unfortunately, we all know, and it's well documented, Kurt had his struggles. He had his issues. And he had his problems. Depending on your thinking and your history of reading what the circumstances around his death, we lost him early. We didn't, because this one came out in 91, the next album in 93. I think we didn't get enough. I think it came out early. I think it really opened the doors. I mean, it freaking kicked him down, blew that shit wide open, and we had the greatest generation of, I think, rock music to this day. I know a lot of people, I know we're gonna have listeners who are gonna be like, you kids don't know shit, and we're not kids, but there's probably some listeners that are gonna be like, y'all don't know shit. There's 70s rock and the 60s rock were the greatest, or whatever. But I think because we had it so early in the 90s, and unfortunately by no fault to the rest of the band themselves, and I'm not gonna blame it on Kurt either, we lost them early. We only got a small sample of what may or might have been because of that. I think because it happened so early, we had so much great songs that came out later and all the way up to the end of the year that, I mean, I can't call it. I can't. It's really up there. To call it the best song, a 90s rock song, I think it's hard. I think it's more influential than anything.
Well, before you answer, just a quick, it did break doors down, and I'll let you answer. Before this, we had talked about Enter Sandman being the first big rock song of the 90s. Enter Sandman hit number 2 on the Billboard charts. You'll never guess what song kept it out. Informer by Snow. So big, but so Nirvana, Nirvana knocked down doors where artists like Snow weren't as prominent, weren't knocking rock songs out of the number 1 slots on Billboard charts. And I'll give you credit to that, but go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think Informer was more of a novelty than anything. But going back to really argue my point, I know you had mentioned that Kurt Cobain, he felt like he hated the song at a certain point. You got to remember, and he blames it on MTV and on that music video. But what's crazy is he didn't even like the first cut. He actually went back and re-edited the entire video because he didn't like the way it came out, the way it looked, the way it sounded. So he went back in and re-edited it and made it up to his standards, what he appreciated, what he liked, and put it out there for MTV. So it's huge success. Yeah, you could say that MTV played the shit out of it, but it's a lot has to do with him. It's his song, it's his lyrics, it's his fucking video that he re-edited and reshot to put in his own image. And also, you got to remember, Kurt Cobain is probably one of the best frontmen who's ever been in rock and roll, but he was an introvert. He fucking hated people. He was uncomfortable on camera, around people, around crowds. So when you say, like, you know, he already has that feeling of uncomfortableness. So when it hit the charts and it became number one and it was worldwide and world renowned and the best rock song at that point in time, he kind of had to crawl back into his shell, and he kind of like hated it in a way, you know what I mean? Because it's not what he wanted. Of course he wanted to be the next big rock star. Of course he wanted to be big. And then he got all this fame and fortune from this one song, and he resented it because that's not me, and fuck that, and you know, I don't even like that song. You know, I think he tried to push it away because it started to crowd into his personal space, in my personal opinion. And to go into Joseph's point, how it broke down doors. Yes, it had the biggest impact. And if you want to talk about impact, there's no way that anybody could argue that Tonight or Everlong had a bigger impact on 90s rock music than Smells Like Teen Spirit did. And as a matter of fact, obvious choice. Would we have Dave Grohl in the Foo Fighters if Kurt Cobain hadn't passed away? We don't know. But I mean, obviously Dave Grohl is influenced by his time with Nirvana. Smashing Pumpkins, if Smells Like Teen Spirit, didn't go mainstream and didn't take grunge and rock into this new era of 90s and dominating the 90s, would Smashing Pumpkins have had that success? Would their music had as much impact? Would we be talking about Tonight or 1979, or would they be another Blind Melon, which, you know, they sounded okay, but they had a kind of a different sound? And I don't feel like we would. I think if Nirvana hadn't put out Smells Like Teen Spirit and hadn't had that huge success, that grunge music and 90s music may have not been what it is today.
I think Galaxy was Blind Melon's best song. It did sound a lot like a Nirvana song, sort of. I hated that No Rain song, but Galaxy is a good song for anybody looking for a good Blind Melon cut. Kurt Cobain was very introverted. Everything from the way he wore his hair to the layers of clothes to his big sunglasses to, you know, being behind a guitar. It's almost like he tried to creep behind that guitar. He was so lurched and hunched over with his posture. He had all the success Billy Corgan wished he had, all the attention. I don't think there's any doubt of the influence that Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit has. And I know this is a back and forth argument platform. I do think that it's just very difficult to gauge a song that is so resentful from the artist. But I know that's kind of the cool rock star thing to do. I'm sure he's not the first person that disowned and disengaged with something that made him or her popular. But it also feels that it almost feels inauthentic to the point where I think Kurt Cobain himself is almost saying, this wasn't my song. I'm a genius who did, you know, Drain You and In Bloom and all these other songs, but Smells Like Teen Spirit was part of the machine that I hated so much and avoided for so long, and it became this huge song. It became this conglomerate, and it became lunch boxes and stickers and fads at JCPenney, and that's not what he wanted. It was an influence for all those things, but those things weren't rock. And I think we're arguing the best rock song, and I think this song was so commercialized and something that Cobain didn't envision. That's why I think it keeps it away from being the ultimate rock song. I think it's the most influential. I just don't think it's the best.
I think it became so commercial because of its success. I don't think it was commercial and that's why it was successful. I think it was successful and that's why it became so commercial and being on lunch boxes and T-shirts and all this other shit. And yeah, you said, you know, the machine may have gotten to it, but it was a song that he wrote when he was dating his girlfriend. That girlfriend was actually the reason why he named it Smells Like Teen Spirit, because on his wall at a party one night, she wrote it on the wall, Kurt smells like teen spirit. And he actually got a big kick out of it because he thought that she was talking about like his voice maybe being that, teen revolution and that boycott against society, when really she was just saying he smells like the deodorant, which is kind of fucking funny.
Yeah. And he shows you how distant Kurt Cobain was, because I think all of us at that age knew that teen spirit was a deodorant because you'd see it on commercials on MTV all the time. But Kurt Cobain, being who he was totally distanced from that. Video was classic, big takeoff of Rock and Roll High School by the Ramones. Just kind of cool, dirty, and edgy. It's a great song, man. I can't argue that. I can't listen to it anymore because I'm done listening to it. I think I've listened to this song hundreds and thousands of times, and that's why I just don't think it endures. But I mean, I can't argue its influence, and I can't argue Kurt Cobain's genius, especially on the day of his death.
Yeah. Joseph, any last thoughts?
I just think it's interesting how you said how Billy Corgan wanted the success that Kurt Cobain had. And what's crazy is that whether you agree that he had the success that Kurt Cobain had or not, did Dave Grohl have that success because of what happened? Do you think that Dave Grohl got the success that Kurt Cobain had that Corgan wanted as well? Do you think I think we've all said, and Randy mentioned it earlier, Corgan was a genius, and that was the issue. I think that's what you said. These guys, these frontmen or these songwriters that we picked, I know it's a band and we're talking about that, but clearly, it's the song, it's the songwriter and the vocalist that's singing the song and that wrote the song. And I guess it's more the lyrics that hit us and why we talk about it. I know the drums, bass guitar, and all that comes into play, but these guys were all in their own weird way geniuses, I guess. I mean, Kurt, I think that was the term that it was never, I guess it was never good enough for him. I kind of look at that, that like everything that he wrote, we thought they were great songs, but to him, they weren't. I think he did say that he liked some of the songs, but this one in particular, he says that he hated. So nothing's ever good enough. Nothing. It's weird, how it can be said that nothing was good enough for him. For Corgan, he was too good. He was too smart or too good for his own for his own well-being and grow. I guess in a way, he's the most sane of them all. I mean, he has his great career. He's a great musician, no doubt. But it is kind of weird how this is the success that we mentioned of each of them.
Cobain's a lot like Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys. Nothing was ever good enough, and Pet Sounds is one of the best albums ever, and it's brilliant. And Brian Wilson still says it wasn't perfect, and I think that's a lot of that was Cobain's issues a lot, and maybe drove him to something else. I'm sure there are other factors. To wrap it up, guys, do you guys agree that the '90s rock is the best era of rock music?
I do.
You do?
Most definitely. And I know people are going to say that, well, you all are biased because of your age, and we were kids of the '90s or '80s babies, or some of us, '80s babies, jerk, '90s kids. Randy was a young teenage adult in the '90s, so I mean, he was in the thick of it. We were just getting there, and I know, like I said, people are going to probably say we're biased, but I think it was. I mean, I feel that way.
And, being from the same decade and growing up the same years, because we're roughly the same age, I have to strongly disagree. The 70s rock and roll was the best ever and will always be the best ever. And I know that's for a later date and a later time to argue.
Good
but
topic.
The genres that were created in the 90s and the 80s were all offshoots of what came before it in the 70s. And I'll leave it at that.
And Aerosmith is like, fuck it, we got the 70s and the 90s.
And the 2000s.
They're good either way.
Hey, that's an elevator.
I think we could agree that, I mean, for most of us, especially listeners out there, if you're listening, if you clicked on this, I think most of us can agree that the 90s, they were the best times of our lives, or the best time of our lives. Don't worry, my wife is barely halfway through the most intense movie scene pod, so she's not going to listen to this for a while, but the 90s were just the greatest decade. I think a lot of us miss them dearly, but that is our show for today. I want to thank Bob and Joseph once again. We're going to watch the end of some college basketball here, but join us next time when our topic will be best coming of age movie. Next week, we'll be talking about the best coming of age movie. So let us know your thoughts. What is the best 90s rock song? Hit us up. You can reach us at formidableopponents@gmail.com. You can follow us on Twitter at FOpponents, or you can follow us on Instagram at formidable_opponents. Follow us. We want to thank our listenership. It's been growing week after week. We see people are still downloading the first few episodes. We're catching on. We have, word of mouth, our friends who are definitely going to invite on the future episodes. Just very happy to do this. And we thank you guys for your listenership. So for Bob and Joseph, next week, we'll be talking about coming of age movies. We hope you guys join us next week, and we'll see you next time on Formidable Opponents. Bye, everybody.